So today we're talking with Fiona English, who is based in Dublin and is a keynote speaker, coach and consultant who combines her extensive experience from working in global investment markets with a deep interest in human potential, and is now taken a path to, working on, your spiritual journey, and having studied positive psychology and helping people discover their own spiritual journey, Fiona. So tell us a little bit more about that and how you sort of got into this path. Very interesting path. You were actually in Barcelona, and now you're you've gone back to your roots.
I have. So thank you for having me. So my own journey was probably slightly unusual. So I did what everybody did. When I left college, I started working in investment. I did that for about 20 years. And then 3 years ago next week, actually, I resigned from my job and I started a new journey for myself. But I think telling the story like that is almost making it sound like before and after. Life's not like that. I was always, I suppose, interested in spirituality. I probably had a bit of a spiritual hunger because I wasn't involved in any church, and I was trying to figure out what spirituality meant to me. So that was probably happening on Saturday mornings in my life when I wasn't busy working and traveling. And like everything in life, about 10 years ago, I probably started spending more time thinking about what I wanted. I started meditating, for example. It's always the simple things that interest you or that kind of start a journey that you don't even know that you're starting. Then through my work, I had a coach. So as part of our leadership development, I had a coach, and that allowed me some time to think about things that I liked and what did I want to do and who was I. And then I went on to train as a coach. So I was always very, very interested in who we are as people. Excuse me, and how that plays out in our life and the possibilities and potential of who we are. So I decided that I would train as a coach, and through that I was introduced to positive psychology, and I always describe it as a bit of the light bulb went on for me. I was always really interested in people like Abraham Maslow, which we all know from the hierarchy of needs. So positive psychology is like the new phase of that, in terms of how do we encourage people to flourish in life. And as often happens, just after I was introduced to that through the coaching work that I was still doing on the side of my main job, which was traveling extensively from an investment perspective. We were taken over, our company was taken over, and I had the opportunity to leave. So I left, decided that I would do a master's in positive psychology then. During that, I went and lived in Barcelona, so I felt that I needed some space to think about what were the next stages of my life. And while I was doing the Masters in Positive Psychology, I knew before I even started that I wanted to do my research specifically on spirituality and what it means to people. So instead of trying to get hung up about definitions, to say, you consider yourself spiritual, tell me about what's that like in your life. And that, I suppose, has brought me to where I am now, where I still do research. I write extensively about spirituality in the modern stage, if you like, and I do a lot of speaking work around that as well. And I suppose the reason I give, so much detail about what that looked like is that I always say to people, like, I didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, I want to research spirituality, that's what I would do. It started many years ago with increasing my own interest in myself, starting to meditate, and then the journey kind of meanders, and eventually it starts to become clearer to you what is the type of work that you really want to be involved in. And this very much, when I gave myself permission to say it out loud, this very much felt like a calling for me, and something that I couldn't ignore about myself anymore.
Right. And when you talk about meditation, I mean, do you practice meditation every day?
Yeah, so I would say that, I was trained as a meditation teacher during this process as well. So, and some of that was to deepen my own meditation practice. So my meditation started out with like 10 minutes a day, doing something on Headspace, for example. And now I would say that I do contemplative practice every day. So I don't always believe it has to be a case of you sit for 10 minutes and breathe in and out, for example. For me, a walk in nature is a form of meditation, for example. Like, that meditation and contemplative work is about spending time with yourself on your own, observing what's happening for you in the current moment. So I do a variety of different things like that. I try to do a 10-minute or 20-minute sitting meditation every day. But for example, this week I posted on social media that I was feeling, which happens to everybody who meditates, that you're trying to meditate and it's feeling really hard.
Yes.
So I went and sat under a tree for an hour instead, and said, I'm just going to sit here and not put pressure on myself to meditate. So
Yeah.
again, a long answer to your question. Yes, I do meditate, and I teach it as part of my courses, but I do it in the way that feels right for me in the moment as well. For me, it's all about carving out time for yourself. That's what contemplative practice is, alone, to listen to what's going on inside.
Yeah, without being distracted by everything
Exactly.
else.
By
Yeah.
everything else that's going on. Yeah.
Yes. And as a, being brought up in Dublin, did you have quite a strict sort of religious, kind of, did you have to go to church every weekend, or?
So I was born Catholic, which is almost you have a 90% chance of that in Ireland, I would say. So, I went to a Catholic school, which again, most of the schools here are Catholic. In terms of a strict upbringing, I would say that my parents were probably more liberal than other parents when I was growing up. So I decided when I was 13 or 14 that I wasn't going to go to mass or religious services anymore, and there wasn't any pushback in my house from that. And I was always quite opinionated, which is something that I've carried with myself throughout my life. So I was just like, I don't believe in this, there's too many rules. I'm a woman, and basically it doesn't look like I'm an equal citizen in this institution, so I'm not going to participate in this anymore. So leaving was quite easy, actually. It wasn't a case, and do you ever leave? It's not like you send a letter to say that you leave. I just didn't participate in it anymore. And my own mother doesn't. She around the same time decided that she didn't want to do that for similar reasons as well. But I think as soon as I decided that I wasn't doing that, then I created a vacuum in my life, because spirituality is not about institutions and religion and, having a predefined belief system. For me, and I've only learned this in recent years, spirituality is about connecting first with yourself. So as soon as we give up something or empower ourselves by walking away from something that we don't like, that particular framework, I think then until we find something else, there's a lack of connection going on in our own lives. Or certainly that was my own experience, that I was probably very spiritually hungry in my 20s. It got slightly better in my 30s when I started to meditate. But it's only in the last few years, and obviously I researched this, I spend a lot of time on it now, that I've really started to understand what spirituality is in my life and what it can be. And without it, I think that it has really freed me to be the person that I am. So.
Did you find it easy when you left your corporate job to sort of go into sort of the path of spirituality, and do you see any kind of synergies nowadays, in relating to that?
Did I find it easy? No, I found it very painful, actually, because it's almost like a coming out where you say, actually, I'm secretly really spiritual, and I've been doing a lot of meditation, and I've been reading huge, vast amounts of spiritual texts for the last 10 years and telling very few people in my life, because I felt that, I had a certain persona, and I was very respected, and people saw me as being very, driven and ambitious, which I'm still all of those things. But it was almost like if I said, oh, by the way, I'm going to research spirituality, that they wouldn't think all of these things about me again, which is so ridiculous when you say it. But it's funny, when I speak at events now, people come up and tell me exactly the same story all the time. So it's almost like we say, oh, being spiritual is less than, where I think being spiritual is just actually part of the human condition. So I definitely went through about a 12-month process, and during this time I went to Barcelona, which was really good for me, because I got to, you arrive in a new city and you just are who you are, and there's not this expectation from your previous life or people that were in your life. So it really allowed me the space to also to come to terms with what I wanted to do. It's not the easiest thing to say, actually, I think my calling is in spirituality, and I want to do research, and I really want to empower people to decide what spirituality is in their life. I couldn't just drop that over dinner on a Saturday night, particularly because, again, people thought of me in a certain way. So I probably went through about a year of coming to terms with it myself, and then talking about it more openly all the time. So I'm not sure if that answered your question. So leaving the job was actually probably the easiest part. Being very clear about what I wanted to do and being willing to speak about that quite openly was probably the harder part.
Right. And then when you work with clients nowadays, I mean, you're very much sort of focused on sort of leadership and conscious leadership.
Mm.
So how do you connect that with walking into sort of like the corporate world in terms of how do you sort of work with them, and how do you get them to understand that it all starts with you?
Yeah, for sure. So, typically the work that I do, I've zero interest in going in and doing a big pitch to a corporate and saying, follow me, this is what you should do, like spirituality is the way, so I'm much more inclined to say, first of all, I think spirituality can be whatever you want it to be. So one of my taglines is, what does spirituality mean to you? And for me, it's really about connecting with yourself. So when I do work with corporates, often what I find is they have found me. So they understand that they want to have more conscious leadership. And for me, conscious leadership is that I recognize that I have to do the inner work to show up to be the best version of myself that I can be. And I understand that I don't want my company to be solely for profit, which is something that we're seeing growing. And obviously my background in investment lends itself to these conversations, because I also bring skills that are outside understanding what spirituality is and how we need to connect more. And I really believe that, people, purpose and planet can coexist, but what that requires is really courageous decisions from leadership. So I'm really interested in working with people who understand that already, that they're at the point where that is conscious in their own mind, but they also understand that this is going to be, as leadership often is, a very lonely journey where I have to make tough decisions that not everybody's going to be happy about, but to do things that I believe will be better value for me, for the people that work for me, for our planet, and for humankind, if you like. And I need a safe space, either through coaching, or often I do I do some sessions around what was it to be wise? What is it to be wise as a leader? And they're the type of people that will come to me. If I'm speaking to a leader and he or she is saying to me, I've no clue what you're talking about, I think, well, there's no point in us working together. You have to get to a certain level of being awake and conscious about what it is you want. And then I think you're willing to do the hard work of tapping into who you are and what the barriers are within yourself that are stopping you from being that person and making the decisions that will help you live that life. And my own story is a very good example of that. I had to spend time with my own coach saying, why is it such a big deal for you to say that you feel drawn to effectively what is a form of spiritual leadership, if you like, that you research it and put it out into the world. The starting point for me doing that work was to admit that I had some barriers and belief systems within myself that I needed to overcome. So I think that that's kind of a good comparison for where leaders are, and say, I've been running this business for 10 years and it's been really financially successful, but I'm actually feeling more drawn to us having a better impact on our planet. And how do I even go about that? How do I say that? I have investors. How am I going to discuss that with our investors? That may mean less financial returns for the next 2 years, but I know it's the right thing to do. So I really want to work on myself, knowing that will lead to better results in terms of what I consider success to be for myself and my business.
That's a question for everyone, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And also, I mean, spirituality for you answered that question in terms of it's getting to know yourself. What do a lot of people, what do your clients say when you ask them, what does spirituality mean for them?
Sure. So actually, what does spirituality mean to you was my research question for my master's. So that's what I basically went and interviewed people and said, tell me, what does spirituality mean to you? And I really wanted to use that question because you can come up with all the definitions that you want, but I think it's the experience of spirituality rather than the definition of it that helps us in life. And there was 3 things that came out of it. The biggest one was connection, that people felt not only connected to a higher power, but connected to themselves. And they recognized it wasn't like, like God is out there or the universe or a higher power or whatever. They used about 10 terms in terms of, universal consciousness and energy, whatever it might be. But they all talked about residing within them. So this idea of oneness, that there is a life force within me that's also within you. And that's about what connectedness is, that I recognize that we are all sharing this life force, if you like. And so that was the biggest theme, and that almost supported the other things in their life. So they depth of meaning and purpose. They understood that they were here for a reason, and they understood that sometimes life was hard, it was a journey, but whatever came as an obstacle into their life was basically there to enhance their own personal development or spiritual growth, depending on the language that you want. And the last point that came out, which is again why I'm such a big proponent of authenticity, is that spirituality, or having a spiritual framework and an understanding of their life, helped them to live a more authentic life, which they all talked about being hard. I mean, I see a lot on Instagram, be yourself, do this. I'm like, yeah, that's great, but actually authentic living isn't always easy, because it is almost, and I said this to you before we started recording, it's a radical decision, because you're choosing to be different, and the world really wants you to be the same. And definitely people in your life, when you step out and you do something that's slightly left field, people go, oh, hold on a second, because not only have you done something different, all of a sudden their own belief systems are a little bit threatened then. So authenticity is like a muscle that you have to cultivate. And what people told me when I interviewed them was that having a spiritual framework, having a belief system, understanding that sometimes life was hard, enabled them to be more authentic in what they did. It was like a muscle or a support system that they had internal to themselves that helped them to be more authentic.
And I mean, when people sort of try to be themselves, whether it's at work or in their life, what are the, what would you recommend, what would you say to somebody when they come across sort of obstacles and sort of turning those obstacles into opportunities?
So I think the first thing I would say is to be gentle with yourself. Sometimes you do come across these obstacles and they're hard. And, even I would say even in the last 3 years, I've had situations where, I've turned up at an event, maybe it's particularly corporate, and there's people there, who question what I'm doing for research. And I've walked away going, that made me feel really uncomfortable, or potentially maybe I wasn't as authentic as I could have been. And I don't beat myself up about it. I say, well, why did that happen? What did it trigger in you? What did you fear when that happened? And, how can you do it better the next time? So I'm really compassionate with myself that we're all just on a journey and we're all just trying, and everything that happens, I think, I'll try and do it a bit better the next time. But I suppose that I really think authenticity, like everything, like meaning making in life, for example, is a muscle. So what I encourage people to do is, again, it goes back to, are you spending time with yourself? Are you getting to know yourself well? Because it's very hard to be authentic in situations where your authenticity is threatened. Because, I'm in the middle of writing an article at the moment called The Compromise Between Authenticity and Belonging. Because when you do decide to be slightly different, you give up some of your belonging, of that cozy feeling of being in the group. But the more you get to know yourself, the more you become comfortable with who you are, and you're very certain about that. So when you step into a situation where maybe somebody's questioning who you are, you're kind of more solid in yourself. You're able to say, actually, that's just not who I am. This is who I am. But it's very much a process, and it's like going to the gym. You have to do it all the time for you to just get better at it. And I started noticing it more about myself when I was speaking at events, and somebody would ask me a question and say, Fiona, you talked about the universe, and I was thinking, did I talk about the universe? But it just came out of me so naturally, because that was my way of being in my life all the time. That it actually just becomes muscle memory to you, because actually what we do in our lives, and a lot of the research, Abraham Maslow talks about this, that you're born perfect, you're born authentic, and then from the time you're schooled, it's all of a sudden that we start getting molded by society into somebody that they would prefer us to be. So authenticity, I would say, you're relearning authenticity, because you're trying to get back to who you are before everybody told you to be a different way. So be gentle with yourself, but spend time with yourself. Literally have a relationship with yourself, get to know yourself in a better way. And then that person starts to be the person that you are in every situation. And what we know in positive psychology is that role variation, which is I meet you and I'm one version of myself, and I meet somebody else and I'm a different version. It's exhausting, because you're actually keeping up a tower of lies. But secondly, it's not good for your well-being. We don't feel good about that, when you walk away and say, I wasn't my most authentic self in that situation. But it's a practice, and it's something that I try and practice all the time. So, and for example, when I'm interviewed here, I tell the warts and all story of my journey. I didn't wake up one morning and go, oh my God, I'm so spiritual. Wait until I tell the whole world. That was a practice for me to be my most authentic self. So that, again, the gentleness and compassion about, like, you're not going to get it right in every situation, but what you're trying to do is to honor yourself and honor the perfection of who you are, and to like, make yourself strong enough to show that against other people's opinions, which are going to happen forever. So
and it's nature versus nurture, isn't it?
totally, 100%.
And the nurturing part is the bit that you have to unravel.
Yes. Or was it even nurturing? It was telling you to do something different. So
Exactly. So, with your, why do you think it's so important for people to find their sort of purpose at work, and what would you recommend to take, the path of discovery? You help with, finding people's purpose. How do people struggle to find their true purpose in life?
they do. And I think one of the reasons is they feel under so much pressure to find it. So I call it kind of, and again, because meaning and purpose are a research area of mine, I say, like, we have this tyranny of purpose going on at the moment. What's your purpose? Find your purpose. Like, and that puts people under more pressure to have
Doesn't
this
it?
kind of mountaintop experience where they're just like, oh my God, I found my purpose. So I say two things to people. So first of all, please take some solace in the fact that you are on this planet would tell me that there is a purpose to your life. Like, the fact that you are here is purposeful. And your number one job, that I always say to people, your job is to reveal yourself. So when I tell my own story, like, what I was trying to do was actually get to know myself better. And that was a period of time when I was, spending more time in contemplative practice. I had a coach of my own. I did some therapy sessions at one point. You're trying to unpack who you are and break down some of those belief systems. And the more I got to know myself, I almost revealed myself back to myself. And then it became obvious the things that I was interested in. And I started this journey of training as a coach, which led me into positive psychology, which led me into kind of, I suppose, spending a huge amount of time looking at spirituality. That was because I got to know myself better. So that's the very first point, is the purpose. And Carl Jung says that the privilege of a lifetime is to know who you are. Like, so for me, that should be your primary focus in terms of purpose. It's not necessarily that you go off and solve some big problem. It is that you need to know yourself. And the second thing is that meaning and purpose go together. And I think that purpose has been hijacked in terms of saying, find your purpose. But what you actually need to do is create meaning. So meaning is the narrative that we tell ourselves about our lives. So that's why all spiritual traditions, they're great storytellers, because they're helping us. Here's a story that will help you to make a story for your life. So the narrative that we tell ourselves about our life is really important. But because a lot of us don't participate in religion anymore, it's a skill that we've lost. How do I create meaning in my life? So I encourage people to sit down and say, what is the story of my life, and what do I want the story of my life to be? So for example, a great example of meaning is I tell you my spiritual journey, and then I say, and it turned out to be my calling, and this is very purpose-driven work for me. But like, who knows? Like, that's the story I tell you about my life. It's the story I deeply believe about my life. But ultimately, it's a narrative that I have constructed. And out of that comes purpose. So purpose is almost the action for the story of your life. And typically what we find is that, there's a great link between struggle in life. So I had a lot of spiritual struggle. I was trying to understand who I was. And out of that, I suppose I have found this very purpose-driven work for me, and something that I really believe in. It's very aligned with who I am. It allows me to be my most authentic self, because all of my work is involved around speaking and writing and working with people on these topics. But the first thing I had to do was to understand that it is not self-indulgent. It is an absolute priority for you to spend time understanding who you are and what you need. And if you really invest in yourself that way, your purpose will manifest itself out of that. So as opposed to assuming that purpose is out here, like, find your purpose is almost like, I dropped it on the way to Lidl yesterday, like, that it's outside of myself. Your purpose is within yourself. And the more you get to know yourself, the more you will say, well, I'm really passionate about these areas of my life, and that I want to spend more time doing that. And the last point I will make, I'm almost giving a sermon at this point about it, but I'm really, really passionate about, like, stop putting pressure on yourself to find your purpose. Is, you want a meaningful life. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of the meaning is going to come from the work that you do. I'm quite lucky that, like, a lot of the meaning that comes in my life, but I also have meaningful relationships. I have meaningful experiences. I find joy by going hiking, for example. They all create a very meaningful life for me. And when I look back on my previous, I suppose, career, and I really enjoyed that career. It wasn't like I hated it and then I found it a new way. I really, really enjoyed it. What I would say was that I was putting too much pressure on that job to give me deep purpose in my life. And as a result, I was working very long hours. And I think that this is, if we look at the world, we've large amounts of burnout and all of that, because we're saying to one area of our life, give me all the purpose that I can get. Where I say, why don't you get to know yourself better, create meaningful experiences in your life, of which work should be one for sure. But don't put all of that pressure to have a job that, saves humanity, for example. I think that we're all looking to have a bigger impact on the world, but that starts by you having a bigger impact on yourself. The more whole you become, the more healed you become of old belief systems, you immediately will be a brighter person in the world. You'll have a better impact on your immediate community, and then perhaps something will come out of that for you in terms of what you want to do professionally. But for me, if you get to know yourself well and you're living a life that you enjoy, that's purposeful in itself. And I think that is much more wholesome way of looking at it than you have to do something in a work situation.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing, is that people put too much pressure in one area,
Totally.
and don't balance it out in their life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they have that pressure of, what is my purpose? What is my purpose for work? And how does that align with who I am? And actually, again, it's how do you align it with your values?
Exactly. And I think if you're asking the question, what is my purpose? That's spiritual hunger for me, that there's something within me that is not getting enough nurture. And in my case, it was spirituality. I always say that I wrote an article recently, it's on my website for anybody that wants it, where I called it Searching for the Self. And I say, I look back 10 years ago and I was intellectually overstimulated, but I had a hungry soul, so I had all of this kind of very work that I really enjoyed and everything, but I'd no nurture from my soul going on. So if what is my purpose is basically longing. I'm longing for something else. I'm longing for something to be different. So again, the only way for you to figure that out, and I'm almost repetitive at this point, is to get to know yourself better. Because nobody else can figure that out for you. The longing could be, I want more time off. The longing could be for anything. It isn't necessarily that it is for more work. It could, and actually in most cases, it's probably for less work.
Yes, and this is how you align spirituality, meaning, and authenticity.
Absolutely. It's about spirit is you. It's the innate essence of who you are. So for me, the getting to know yourself is saying to your spirit, not your mind, not the part of you that perhaps turns up at work every day. It's saying to you as a unique person here, I'm going to invest this time to get to know you and to understand who you are and to see what you want. And that mightn't be more work. It mightn't even be purposeful work. Maybe it's something else, so I think that we confuse spirituality because of religion, that people either think I go to mass every week, or I'm involved in institutional religion, or people say, is spirituality a bit woo woo? We kind of have these polarized terms about what it can be. And that's why I always ask the question, never mind what I think, what do you think it is? But for me, spirituality is really about connecting in with yourself and recognizing the sacredness of who you are, and honoring that every day, and not giving away your power by working long hours or doing things that you don't want to do, and again, it just all comes back to how can you know yourself better, and not in your mind. How can you know your whole self better? So this kind of idea of mind, body, soul.
And how do you help your clients on their path, and what are the results you see? What are the positive changes you see?
Sure. So I don't like to claim the results as something that I deliver for them. So typically when people show up to coaching, and we see this for in research around both coaching and therapy, once you've made the decision to say, actually, I want to go and speak to somebody and get some support to figure out what I want in my life, that's half the journey almost, because you're investing in yourself. And what I do in coaching is I always say to my coaching clients, you have the wisdom that you need. What I'm going to help you do is unlock that. I'm not going to give you a 10-step plan for your life. What I am going to do is create a space for you to chat out what's going on for you, because often when we go through these periods of wanting different, or have a longing, or maybe it's a spiritual awakening, whatever it is for you, we're a little bit lost, and we're looking for, how can I say all these things in my mind in a safe space? And that's effectively what coaching provides, whether it's in the workplace or personally, that I'm going to help you to unpick what's going on for you, to get to know yourself better, and then to set some plans for you in terms of what you want. And sometimes I work with people for 2 months, and other times I work with people for 2 years, depending on what's going on for them. And even in my own coaching sessions, you know, sometimes I just rock up and say, I just need someone to talk to this week. Another week I'll rock up and say, actually, I need to focus on making a plan for my business for the next 6 months. But what I typically find with clients is we often have a dual process going on, where some of it is, that's going on. I want to really understand why I feel that way about that particular thing that's going on in my life, and then we also kind of have a planning element of it, where they're like, you know, I would like to do this. So we look at how that could happen, how that could manifest in their lives, what actions can they put in place for that. And what the feedback I get from clients, and I don't think this is unique to me as a coach, I think this, if you have a coach that you really connect with, is that they just open up to the possibilities of their lives. We make our lives smaller. We don't believe that we can have all the things that we want, where a coach helps you to unpick the belief systems that make you think that, and to put in place the planning and the momentum that you need to have the life that you want.
I think during these sort of, you know, difficult, challenging times, that we've all sort of had time to think about who we are as people. I mean, I think coaching has definitely come into play because it's sort of been building as a business for 10 years or more, and now people are like sort of like wanting to get to know who they truly are, you know, finding their purpose. So, you know, in terms of you know, coaching people during these times, what do you think people need, I mean, in terms of these challenging times and getting to know themselves?
Sure. So what I've seen actually come up in coaching sessions, and I spoke about it at an online event recently, is that I think that, you know, people have been tolerating certain things in their lives, and all of a sudden you have this big seismic shift of what life is, and we just think, well, I'm absolutely not tolerating that anymore. Like, you know, I was kind of rocking along with a certain amount of certainty in my life, and I was willing to put up with the fact that I wasn't really happy in my job, or I wasn't really happy in this relationship, and all of a sudden, like, the carpet was pulled from underneath us all. So people are like, well, now I've no certainty, so I'm definitely not going to keep myself small, or like not be willing to reach for what I want from my life. So I think it's also to be patient, you know, that you can't make all of the changes overnight. So to sit down, I tell people the same thing all the time, regardless of whether you go to coaching or not, you should be spending 10 to 15 minutes on your own every day. I don't care if you're meditating or whether you're staring out the window, but the only way you're going to really tap into what you want or what you feel is by cutting out some of the noise and spending some time with yourself. So that would be my first recommendation. The second thing is to be a little bit compassionate with yourself. This has been a big change, and it's going to take some time for you to integrate that. And the last is to decide, okay, well, what do I want to do, and what support do I need to make the changes in my life that will lead me towards the life that I aspire to. And maybe that's coaching, maybe it's something else, maybe it's that you will start doing yoga, whatever it would be. I am very passionate about coaching because coaching had a profound impact on my life, and I'm also a coach myself. And I think that it is a wonderful space to speak honestly and openly about what you want that you often don't have with other people in your life. You know, you might say to a friend, I'm thinking of, or in my case, if I had said to someone 4 years ago, I'm thinking of researching spirituality, well-meaning people of my life would have said, well, you know, you're giving up a really good career, and you're very successful, you're in, you know, they have plans for you to be X, Y, and Z in the company, yada, yada, yada. But that wouldn't have been the right choice for me. And what coaching allows you to do is have a safe space and say, well, this is actually what I want, and how am I going to put the planning in place to allow me to have that. And to understand that life is a process. You know, you don't make a decision one day and it turns into something else the next day. It stops and starts, and you know, and you're creating anxiety for yourself because you're giving up certainty. But a well-lived life is not lived in certainty. So you need to take chances on yourself, and again, a coaching space or some support, whatever that might be for you, enables you to reach for those a higher version of your life, effectively.
And who do you look to in terms of, you know, spiritual leaders? Who do you sort of look up to?
Who are my teachers?
Yeah.
So I have my own coach, which I think is really important. As a coach, I think that you always have to be developing yourself, because you're, again, a bit like what I was saying about leadership. If you're responsible for people, which coaches are and leaders are, responsible in terms of, I'm not making the decisions for you, but I'm responsible for turning up as my best version of myself to hold a space for my clients. I have my own coach that I go to that helps me and supports me when I'm having, God, what's going on? What am I doing? And then I also have, I suppose, in terms of teachers, I probably follow certain spiritual teachers. So, for example, Marianne Williamson, I'm a big fan of. She's a spiritual teacher in the States. Who else would I pay attention to? Michael Beckworth, who runs the Agape Spiritual Center in LA. I follow him. But I think most of the work I do, or most of the spiritual work I do, is probably very personal to me. I journal every day, for example. I have a coach that I see every couple of weeks. If I have, sometimes we have longer gaps, but I try to speak to her every 2 weeks. I also do other things, like, I go to Reiki, I go to yoga, whatever I need to really keep myself embodied. But I also have what I would call a growth mindset, that I am always learning, always looking for new things to learn. I never believe that I have all the answers. I'm always looking for ways to get to know myself better, which still happens to me all the time. One of the big gifts of COVID-19 was that I had more time to myself, and then I had realizations about myself that I hadn't had before. So the unraveling of yourself is a lifelong journey, and it does really go out to carving time out to really understand who you are, and also to be really careful about who you're spending your time with. I'm much more discerning about who I spend my time with. Are they supporting my dreams in life? Are they there for me when life's not going well? Do they share my belief systems and my values? Can I speak openly about how I feel with them? I think that, the more you get to know yourself, you might then be questioning who you're spending some of your time with. And I think that that's a really good process, that what you're trying to create is an incubator for the life that you want. So the people and the energy that you bring into that, I think, are really important.
Okay, and you studied positive psychology. Do you think, I had mentioned about having a positive mindset, every day. Do you think that is an important attribute to have in terms of lifting your spirit and feeling in balance?
I think that, again, I think I'd probably put a positive mindset into the same bracket as purpose, that there are downsides to, say, be positive. Sometimes you just don't want to be positive. I think where meaning plays a very important part in mindset is that, I believe no matter what comes into my life that I'll be able to deal with it. It doesn't mean that, I was going to curse, but I won't do that. It doesn't mean when terrible things come into my life, depending on who's listening, they mightn't like it. It doesn't mean when terrible things come into my life that I'm going to say, be positive. I'm really going to sit with myself and say, this is really, really terrible. And, I'm going to look after myself. But do I trust myself to survive it? Absolutely. So I think that it's more about trusting yourself, looking for the positives and the opportunities in situations. So, for example, a line I often use, which is from Kabbalah, which is, why is this in my movie? So why has this event arrived in my life, and what can I learn from it, and how can I move myself forward in a way that supports me? And we talk about the growth mindset in positive psychology, which is that, a fixed mindset is, this is the way it is and this is the way it's always going to be. A growth mindset is, there are endless possibilities and I'm always learning different ways to live my life. And I think if you have that kind of openness to experience, and that you have deep trust in yourself, which comes from understanding that, I have the inner resources to deal with whatever life throws at me, no matter how bad that is. I think that enables a positive mindset, but one that isn't a toxic positive mindset, which is, be positive no matter what comes your way. And positive psychology is obviously, the science of how do we help people to flourish in life. So there are things that you can do, like, we talk about gratitude, for example.
Exactly.
We talk about different practices that can help you to be more positive in your daily life. So I think all of those are really good ideas. Spending time in nature, doing physical exercise, all of those things will help you to live a better life. But don't become so attached to positivity that you don't allow yourself to feel negative feelings, because that's not healthy. You need to be able to integrate the down times and how they feel, and to be compassionate to yourself at those points and to learn from them. I look back in my life and say, anytime there wasn't, or something, the breakup of a relationship, something really negative has happened, whatever that is, I learned so much about myself in those scenarios. I healed parts of myself in those scenarios, and I also realized what I was capable of. So I think the idea around positive mindset is, yes, to develop that mindset about your life, but don't be chained to it, that when something negative happens that you don't know how to be gentle with yourself as well.
Exactly. It's about putting yourself in your uncomfortable space and dealing
exactly with it. 100%.
Well, Fiona, it's been wonderful talking to you today, and
really enjoyed it.
It's so much to talk about in terms of spirituality and finding your purpose, and being authentic. So I think everybody nowadays is realizing that, and I think you're a great contributor in helping people realize that.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you very much, Fiona, for joining us today on People on the Grid.
And thank you very much for asking me.